Looking ahead to a huge week in Washington, down to the wire, on the plan to avert a government shutdown. Jim Comey has been indicted, and Israel Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu's at the White House to talk about peace in Gaza. All of that and so much more today on 10-Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
Before we get into the news of the day in Washington, there were two tragic violent events over the weekend. First, in North Carolina, a shooting at a waterfront bar in Southport. In what authorities have described as a highly premeditated attack, 3 people were killed and 8 were injured when a former Marine opened fire on a dockside restaurant. Then on Sunday morning in Michigan, another former veteran opened fire on a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints congregation in Grand Blanc, Michigan. The shooter reportedly crashed his vehicle into the entrance, got out, opened fire on members of the church, and then set the church on fire, potentially using an accelerant like gas to spread the blaze around the church. So far, there's been reportedly 5 victims. They have accounted for everyone who was there, but unfortunately, there are still many victims in the hospital.
This was an evil act of violence. That's exactly what this was. And this is not Grand Blanc. This does not define Grand Blanc and who we are. We are a community, and I am confident that together we're going to build a stronger community due to this incident.
A second attack on a church in just a matter of months. And as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this affected me deeply. And my prayers are with the victims, their families, the community around there, and also our country, as I hope that we can somehow move past this crazy spate of terrible, violent incidents around our country. Today, leaders in Washington are scrambling on the last day to avert a government shutdown. Over the weekend, there was lots of jousting back and forth in the media between Democrats and Republicans about who would be to blame for a potential government shutdown. Yesterday, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt framed it this way.
There is zero good reason for the Democrats to vote against this, especially when the Democrats have voted for this 13 previous times as recently as March.
As we've talked about here on 10-Minute Drill, Democrats did the interesting strategy of laying out the fact that they would accept blame for this because their base was itching for a fight with President Trump. So they were supportive of running into a government shutdown. But what we've seen since then in the last 2 weeks is Democrat leaders getting cold feet. The facts here are, this is a clean continuing resolution. It follows on spending plans that Democrats had previously voted for 13 times, with nothing new added to it. But a part of Democrats' strategy in trying to reframe this and try and potentially blame Republicans has been to bring in other issues. For example, healthcare subsidies set to expire at the end of the year. Republicans have said we can negotiate those ahead of the end of the year. But Democrats adding them into this debate right now is just an effort to try and save face and reframe this debate. The bottom line that we all understand here is the fact that Democrats have followed their base as they've led them to their lowest approval rating in history. But the other most important dynamic to understand here is that as Democrats have painted themselves into this corner, their rhetoric has made it more difficult for their leadership to find any kind of exit strategy. Here's Chris Murphy.
We have no moral obligation to pay the bills for democracy's destruction.
So as you hear that kind of insane rhetoric from Chris Murphy, remember, he has voted for this budget 13 times. So when he says it funds the destruction of our democracy, according to his own rules, he has voted to destroy democracy 13 times. Again, absurd, cartoonish nonsense, but it highlights the fact that Democrats have painted themselves into a very tough corner that any sort of solution they get out of this, they're going to get attacked by their own base because people like Chris Murphy and AOC have said that they're going to fund the destruction of our democracy. Another dynamic that's really important to remember here, Chuck Schumer's concerns about getting primaried by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But one other element to this fight that came up last week, if there is a government shutdown, the White House, particularly Office of Management and Budget, will have the power to determine what is essential. And with that, they'll be able to make pretty extensive cuts to government that DOJ was not able to get to. Now, Democrats forgot about this part of a shutdown, the fact that suddenly they're saying so much of the government that they say is essential every day, they have shut down for a political purpose like this. So now they're having to argue against the fact that they have set up this problem for themselves with no plan to get out of it. Later today, the Senate will vote on the House Clean Continuing Resolution bill, and that will determine whether or not the government shuts down tonight at midnight or not. Yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was at the White House, where President Trump unveiled his 21-point plan for peace in Gaza.
This afternoon, after extensive consultation with our friends and partners throughout the region, I'm formally releasing our principles for peace.
There are a lot of details in that 21-point plan, but two of the key points that Israel is focused on. First, the release of all the hostages that Hamas has continued to hold despite numerous warnings from President Trump. And then second, Hamas being completely obliterated and not a part of the future governing coalition of Gaza. Former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, wrote about this in the Free Press. International guarantees and humanitarian aid won't matter if Hamas refuses to play by the rules. Ahead of this meeting, last week Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to the United Nations, where he received a very interesting response.
Silence dans la salle.
Призываю всех к порядку.
Now, as those diplomats and diplomatic staff are walking out and you hear boos, consider the fact these are diplomats. This is the United Nations, and people are walking out of an address by one of the leaders of a country in the hottest conflicts in the world right now. Now, I was a two-time participant and actually champion in Model United Nations. And to me, the idea of walking out when someone's speaking, when you're there, your purpose there at the United Nations is to focus on peace and bringing peace in the world. These people can't even sit through an address, which I think is outrageous. But one major reason confidence in the United Nations and their role in the world right now is so low. According to Gallup, over 60% of Americans disapprove of the United Nations, and this is one of many reasons why. Last week, former FBI Director Jim Comey was indicted by a grand jury on 2 charges: giving false statements and obstruction of a congressional proceeding. Comey could face up to 5 years if convicted. Now, a lot of Democrats have immediately jumped to his defense and argued that this is an attack on our democracy, an attack on our system, an attack on norms, but none of them are defending Comey on the merits because it does sound like he may have lied to Congress. Here is Speaker Mike Johnson on that.
James Comey lied to Congress. Okay, he took an oath. He said things to Congress that were simply not true. It's called perjury. A grand jury that is not, a nonpartisan, non-biased grand jury that was assembled looked at the charges and they agreed, they voted to bring an indictment of James Comey. Not President Trump, not the DOJ, but a grand jury. That's how our system works.
Late last week, Fox News and Bill Melugin reported that ICE had arrested the Des Moines, Iowa superintendent of public schools, Dr. Ian Andre Roberts, who ICE says is an illegal alien from Guyana and an active ICE fugitive with a deportation order since May 2024. Fox has told Dr. Roberts fled from ICE agents in his car once they ID'd themselves as immigration agents, speeding away, then abandoning the car. He was found in a brushy area 200 yards away with the help of an Iowa State Police canine. So not only was an illegal immigrant running the public school system in Des Moines, Iowa, but he also previously had weapons charges. So you have to wonder what kind of vetting process went into that. On Friday, the Chicago Teachers Union made a lot of news when they posted this: "Rest in power, rest in peace, Assata Shakur. Today we honor the life and legacy of a revolutionary fighter, a fierce writer, a revered elder of black liberation, and a leader of freedom whose spirit continues to live in our struggle." The one problem with this is that Assata Shakur is a convicted cop killer. In 1973, she killed a New Jersey state trooper. She is a domestic terrorist, but the Chicago Teachers Union is honoring her with a post and rest in power. Meanwhile, students in Chicago continue to struggle with some of the worst test scores in the country. Just 30%, less than 1 out of every 3 3rd through 8th graders are proficient in reading, and only 18%. Less than 1 in 5 are proficient in math. Of 11th graders, only 22%, less than 1 in 4, are proficient in reading. So while the teachers union is focused on honoring terrorists and cop killers, they are not teaching kids how to read and write. And that, my friends, is one of the biggest problems we continue to see with teachers unions around the country. Last of all today, we take you back to Fairfax County, Virginia, the hotbed of some of the worst behavior we're seeing from teachers, teachers unions, and school administrators. The U.S. Department of Education announced enforcement action against Fairfax County Public Schools after reports that a school social worker scheduled an abortion appointment for a 17-year-old student, paid the required clinic fees, and swore the girl to secrecy without informing the student's parents, and a second student was allegedly pressured by the social worker to have an abortion. The Department of Education gave this quote to ABC7. "It shocks the conscience to learn that school personnel in Fairfax have allegedly exploited their positions of trust to push abortion services on students without parental knowledge or consent. Children do not belong to the government. Decisions touching deeply held values should be made within loving families. It is both morally unconscionable and patently illegal for school officials to keep parents in the dark about such intimate, life-altering procedures pertaining to their children." Now, I mentioned Fairfax County, and you'll note this is the third crazy story in a week that we've talked about out of Fairfax County, Virginia. Last week, we covered the story of West Springfield High School, also in Fairfax County, where school administrators and teachers allowed a male student with facial hair into the women's locker room to watch freshman girls get dressed for PE. We also have talked extensively about Fairfax County allowed a registered sex offender to visit a water park for kids with disabilities and a park that houses a preschool. That same offender exposed himself to women and girls in bathrooms and locker rooms in both Arlington and Fairfax. So once again, this is the latest of Northern Virginia Democrats' efforts to accommodate perverts, sexual deviants over the basic safety of children, of girls who just want to use a bathroom or a locker room in safety. And again, Abby Spanberger, the Democrat candidate for governor, is nowhere to be seen on this issue. She will not take a position and share where she stands, and that is why she was my loser of the week on Friday night on Special Report. And that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us on 10 Minute Drill. Please tell your friends, send a link to our Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, leave a review, tell your friends. Have a good one.